We have to enter from different sides because we're from different parts of the continent.
How many minutes for questions?
I want to confirm with you, are we leaving at 11:15?
We could go on for like 7 or 8 or 20 hours on this.
It says 11:15 on the...
Yeah.
Okay.
They're now saying 11.
All right.
You got plenty of time.
Plenty of time.
I'll give you a 10 minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me see if I can make
You're
this
the
thing
MC,
work.
Jason. Remember that?
The MC. Okay, glasses.
Well, Jason's
glasses.
doing something there in Southeast Alaska, and my good buddy Jason, right here, amazing guy that I met by accident, and he's also an electronic wizard. So we're going to see some stuff here on the screen in a minute. But essentially, I was born and raised in Southeast Alaska on the east side of Prince of Wales Island. Kind of, I'd say my traditional range is essentially from the north end of Southeast Alaska to the south end. When I was a kid, let's talk about myself since we don't have anything on the screen here. But my dad was a fisherman, a logger, a trapper. So this is kind of how we lived. I grew up on a float house, and my mother is where I get my Haida ancestry. So I live in the small village of Kasaan. This is kind of a shot there of Kasaan, and it's the northernmost Haida village. So when they put it in the U.S.-Canadian border, they kind of split our territory. But we're on Prince of Wales Island, Kasaan Bay right here. So MC.
The MC. I'm Jason Rucker, formerly from San Francisco Maritime. I was there for about 20 years. Left that work. An important part of that work for me in terms of this work is that that's where I got into documenting small boats, measuring and drawing small boats. That's part of the takeaway from the Maritime Park for me. I went sailing with my family, and that is what introduced me to this work. It introduced me to Stormy, and Stormy's work and Stormy's passion for these canoes. So that's the background on me that got me into this work. I was introduced to Stormy in 21 up there in Southeast Alaska, and now we're here.
It was amazing. He was sailing right around the Pacific, so he wasn't just sailing, like around the Pacific Ocean. And right in the middle of COVID, one day I'm at home with my wife, and this vehicle pulls up outside, and our community was pretty closed off, and a couple ladies step out, and I stepped out the door, they step out of the vehicle, and they said, "Hey, this looks kind of like an art place. We're just kind of interested to see what you got going on." I was like, "Yeah, we're not really open for business." And they said, "We're from a sailboat," and I was like, "Yeah, come on in."
So we barged in the middle of COVID, yeah. And that conversation comes up in our talk here is how we were introduced and how this all started. It's really, Stormy and I kind of marvel at it. Almost a year ago now, Stormy and I found ourselves in the forests not too far from where he lives, with a team mostly from Alaska. And we were there because of this Ancient Canoe, which is in really rough shape. It's been in the forest for about 140 years, we believe. So it's in rough shape, but it is unique in its potential to connect Stormy and other Haida carvers today to the ancestral knowledge of these canoes. We're going to come back to this canoe. This is kind of the point of why we're here, but there's a ton of background that we're going to go through first. I like to say there's thousands of years of information that we've got to cover here before we get back to the canoe, and that the canoe can actually make sense, and what we're doing can make sense. Anything else about the canoe at this point, Stormy?
Well, Jason and I have very different styles, and so I'm really trying to go. I'm trying to go with the MC model here that we talked about before we came here. But
I'm going to have to nudge you harder because Stormy doesn't want.
I will say this, I was really that really kind of touched my heart when I was hearing about the anchor and how it just, you know, somebody working just took the anchor home. You know, really thankfully, when this old canoe in the forest was discovered, that didn't happen, or something worse, because Dennis Pollock, the fellow who found it, was working for a timber company, and he was out in the woods making sure that they knew where the borders of their land was, and he came across this, and he just happened to be my neighbor and be a super great guy and knew enough to recognize what it was. And so many other people in his position would have just ignored the fact that it was there, not even recognized what it was or any of those things, and just, you know, fell a bunch of trees on it and logged right over the top of it. Thankfully, he was not one of those persons. He immediately flagged off like 5 acres around this canoe and protected it. And anyway, I just can't thank Dennis enough. He was just a little bit of a superhero in my book.
Bit of a miracle that the canoe still exists. So a little introduction to kind of the where we're headed here. We are headed to Southeast Alaska, where Stormy's from, to learn about the Haida Canoe, the mission of the Haida Canoe Revitalization Group, which is Stormy's organization. And finally, we'll get back to the documentation work that we're doing to try to support Stormy's efforts to revitalize the canoe culture. A little introduction to those of you who haven't been out that direction. There's our Pacific Northwest. Kasaan right there, in red, is the village where Stormy lives. We're going to come in a little bit closer. We're going to zoom in kind of to that blue box there. And now that blue outline is traditional Haida territory. The Haida Gwaii is now in Canada. Prince of Wales Island, where Stormy lives, there in Alaska.
It gives you some sense of why, you know, a canoe might be important, you know, because I didn't realize this until just recently. You know, there's not a lot of places in the world that are set up with all the islands like that. So, you know, this is over 30 miles across here. I think it's more like 80 miles across down here on the lower end of Haida Gwaii. This is where my grandmother was born, right here in Masset, and you know, of course, that's where I live now, and you know, family comes from this whole region here, essentially. But I won't get carried away. We're
going to get right into that. That this is historically and today a maritime place. It's a place where people survive and thrive on the water. Hang on, we got the video, same video maybe. Yeah, so as Stormy was saying, it's a watery place. I don't know if you want to talk any more about your experience of growing up in this watery place, but it's a place where historically and now people communicate with one another by boat.
So right over there, it's kind of a moving target, but that's where my family lived when I was born. You know, we had a float house over behind those islands that are in the background there. So this is just, I kind of made full circle around Southeast Alaska. You know, when I was a kid, I lived around this area, and then later on, I moved up to the north end, and then about 16 years ago, came back down to Kasaan Bay, and looks like I'll be there forever.
And so Stormy is deeply a part of where he lives, and I'm a visitor there. I came there with my family, like I said, and I had always dreamt of Alaska and was blown away by the size of it, the wildness of it, and the remoteness of these coastal villages. And so this is still a maritime world today.
Two of our high school students made this video just about 2.5 weeks ago.
Yeah. This is that fateful meeting years ago when we came into Stormy's carving shed there in Kasaan. I was immediately, as a lifetime boat geek, I was immediately blown away by Stormy and his work. The craftsmanship in these canoes, and Stormy's dedication to the revitalization of this craft and culture. In that very conversation, Stormy introduced us to kind of the history of canoes and how they're made. We'll talk more about some of those details as we go here. But that was the start for me. Stormy, we're going to get into history here. This is the first time Stormy and I have gotten to present together. You can probably tell by the practicedness of this. But in my presentations, I've always had to do the Haida history part, but Stormy gets to do the Haida history part. Skidegate, Haida Gwaii, 1878, and the typical Haida village.
Yeah, this is a typical larger Haida village in those times or before. Lots of totem poles, big cedar houses. I don't know the exact size of those, but like we still have a remaining old house in Kasaan, and it's like 45 feet by 45 feet or some such thing. On the inside, they have a split level, so there's kind of an upper level, and then it drops down about 3 feet to the lower part where there's a fire pit and, kind of activity center of the building, upper area for sleeping. The one in Kasaan, there was like 30 people that lived in the house, so that's worth mentioning. At a different time, people were more practiced at cooperating in larger groups and things like that, which is, well, which is why you think, this pole, it's probably 50 feet or more in height, and nice old growth red cedar.
What amazes me is that there are no inland Haida villages. Every Haida village is on the beach, with all of the houses facing the beach. Poles in front of every house, canoes in front of every house. If there was going to be, if anyone went anywhere, they went by canoe.
What were the poles
signifying? I'm going to cut you off right there. I'm not going to cut you off right there, but Stormy, to keep this one short, because that's another lecture. Go ahead, Stormy.
Well, just very, very simply, most of the figures you're going to find on there are crests relating to the clans that live in the house.
That's the short version. Thanks, Stormy. Stormy. Well, we're going to talk more about Stormy's work, but Stormy carves poles as well, and is a master carver of poles, and can talk to you at lunch about. They're an incredible craft in themselves, of course.
Like my kids say, or my grandkids, blah blah blah.
Another village in Haida Gwaii, similar time. The houses that Stormy's talking about, the poles. A little bit about the older history, Stormy, of the timeline and the use of cedar, etc. You want to talk about that?
Which timeline? Are we talking Ice Age stuff?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, in our area, it seems like the best evidence today suggests that somewhere in the neighborhood of the end of the last Ice Age, that folks started settling in that area, and most likely they arrived by boat. And so, the whole place was covered by ice, and then these little openings, usually where drainages were, started opening up, and people moved into those areas. And very likely my ancestors were there, right from the beginning. We have two native groups in the area that have isolate languages. Haida is one, Tsimshian is another. Just suggesting that folks have been there a long time, not too connected with other people. So essentially people were there before the forests, right? And then as the forests grew up, people grew up with them. We don't know what type of boats they were using, like during the Ice Age or that period afterward. But certainly at some point, people started making dugout canoes. The first trees that would have grown were spruce and pine, after the ice left. So no doubt people were making dugout canoes out of spruce. Spruce is a great material, but doesn't last particularly long. Roughly 4,000 years ago, red cedar started showing up in the area, enough to leave a pollen history. So I'm sure it wasn't too long and people discovered that, hey, this stuff it's a lot better. It lasts longer. It's a little easier to work with. But the main thing is it just lasts longer. So, bigger bang for your buck when you make a canoe out of red cedar.
And one of the things that I love about this photo is that the obvious things, the house and the pole, are made out of cedar. But Haida people also use the bark for making fiber. So the hat is woven from cedar bark, and the robe as well would have had cedar bark fiber in it. So just masters of using the cedar in all the ways it's used. And importantly, they were also used for carving canoes.
Oh yeah, here we're getting to the good stuff.
We like this photo because it just is one of those photos that shows the abundance of the canoe. Before about 1900, there would have been dozens of canoes in any one of those villages, perhaps thousands in Haida territory. The early outside visitors to this part of the world were reported on being greeted by hundreds of canoes at a time. Let's see, a couple of things to point out. There's a few sizes of canoes. There's a small canoe for coastal work. There's a larger kind of 30-foot canoe that's the everyday canoe. Stormy has recently carved one of those and is one that I believe that Stormy is kind of focused on as an important canoe to him. And then there's I like to call the 30-foot canoe, it's a little derogatory, but it's like the station wagon or the minivan of canoes. And they would have done everything with it. Do we have
Jason,
a photo?
I know we don't have too much time. Just
No,
real
no.
quick, you can notice some differences, like these canoes down here, a little bit different than this style with the high sweeping end. These are most likely made out of spruce. Same with this one right here. This is a style that was used more in the northern end of Southeast Alaska. They don't have, and the ones with the high sweeping end, these are the Haida style canoes, and they would all be made out of red cedar. Those are my favorites, anyway.
Yeah, we'll talk more about them. For those that aren't quite as into the canoes as Stormy, and I believe that this may be a gill netter, one of those sailing gill netters that was in the Northwest from ages ago. Stormy's wondering now and looking. There was a larger style of canoe, a ceremonial, or well, you talk about it, Stormy.
Yeah, the larger canoe, it's a similar style to the ones we just looked at. You can see it's got the high sweeping ends, etc. I usually just call it the fancy canoe, and it's one that was more often, saved in collections because I think it was fancy, right? It was large for one, often owned by somebody that could afford it. That kind of made it special to some people. A lot of times it had the fancy work painted on it, and just another reason to collect it. I like the station wagon, doesn't have any fancy paint, that kind of thing. But
so most of the collected collected canoes that you'll find are these big ceremonial ones. And I guess here's a good place to point out both the 30-foot canoes, the kind of the working canoe, and these canoes were used for really long voyaging up and down the West Coast. The canoe also became really well known up and down the West Coast. It was popular because it was a really successful type. So it was traded and sold up and down the coast. Became kind of a typical type outside of the Haida community, both through being taken in trade and bought, as well as other groups starting to carve a similar style canoe. That's safe to say, Stormy?
yeah, I think so. That probably started in the 1800s sometime. That's when there was kind of an influx of materials and other types of materials than local, as well as you can see this post up here. So all the large canoes like that were rigged with sails, and over on the in the big rivers they would use lines and poles to propel them up the river as well. And of course, there's the obvious paddle. Everybody had paddles too. Jason just likes this picture.
I just like that photo of sailing canoe. Come on.
Yeah.
Powerful photo.
It does. It's a good spot to point out that it does appear to have what I would call the aftermarket rudder attached. There are a few of those photos that exist from late 1800s, early 1900s.
So we're going to get into a little bit of canoe design, and then we'll do a little bit of canoe history. This is the 30-foot canoe that Stormy launched last May. Beautiful canoe. I guess I'll just lead by saying that it's a dugout canoe carved from a single western red cedar log, and yet it is not what most people think of when they think of a dugout canoe. Most people think of a fairly log-shaped vessel, and these canoes are not log-shaped, despite the fact that they're carved from a log. So we'll talk a lot more about how that happens here as we go, but some of the defining kind of features of the canoe. This cutaway here, you may have noticed in the video, the cutaway bow the cutaway is actually the bow of the canoe. So it looks kind of like a skeg, but this triangular portion right here is about an inch thick and is made to cut through the water. That flaring bow to shed water. Just really graceful boats.
You can see there's a little piece added on up here.
There's a little piece at either
Same
end.
thing on the other end.
So this is the bow of the canoe. The stern, you can't tell in this view, but the stern is a little higher actually than the bow. This is a view of the stern of the canoe. It's hollow as well. View of the profile, same canoe. That graceful shear line is striking. But again, not what most people think of when they think about a dugout canoe. These are a canoe that are made to go to sea. Stormy, you want to talk a little bit about the process? Oh, where are we? Hold on. What? Okay.
Well, essentially the process, first thing you have to do is find a nice piece of wood, right? So, it's not too much different now than in the old days, but except that, possibly you can get the log from a timber company, and that makes it a lot easier, or you could go to a pile and pick it out. But otherwise, you go out in the forest and you're looking for a nice big red cedar tree. The average canoe in the old days was carved from red cedar that was, about 4 feet in diameter at about this height. And for, age of probably around 400 to 600 years old. That's kind of important to keep in mind when we think about the future and growing these trees for future generations. But essentially, you find the nice clean tree without any defect, not too many limbs, on the lower half of the tree. And of course, you don't want any rot in the middle or anything like that. Red cedar, and at least the red cedar in our area, they tend to rot from the inside out. So you don't necessarily know until you get in there if there's rot, but if you have some experience, you can have a pretty good idea. You can make a $5 bet, on whether it does or doesn't. But essentially, you're cutting the tree down. In the old days, people would be carving the canoe on the spot in the forest, and I think that's an advantage in several ways. Keeps it keeps the canoe from drying out and cracking before you get it finished, which is really important. So you're kind of rough shaping this canoe, and you can see here that this one that I'm working on, it's the ends are pointed, the sides are still a little bit more straight than they will be. See it maybe more over in that one as you get it finished out. Shape the outside, roll it over, hollow out the inside, and yeah, this is my first granddaughter a few years ago. She was helping me there.
Future canoe carver right there.
But, do you have something,
No,
Jason?
please.
So once you get it, all thinned out, and the when it's completed, the sides of it here are only going to be about 3/4 of an inch thick. Even the larger canoes, this one's 30 feet long, but even the larger ones are only 3/4 to an inch thick on the sides. Usually thicker on the bottom. This was an 1 5/16 on the bottom. And okay, so this is getting pretty close to ready to steam open. You can see there was a smaller one up there.
Go ahead.
I've got a little smaller canoe up here that one's only 14 feet long, and you can kind of see the continual curve, and it didn't start out that way. So
we're about to get into that. Hang on, I got to pick the picture.
Okay.
So in the forest, the tree is felled, the canoe is carved to review. On the beach, the canoe is steamed.
There we go. So the beach is a great place to do this. You have all the resources you need, right? So if you were carving it in the forest, I carved it, in my little tent there at home. But anyway, still take it to the beach because you need some firewood, you need some rocks, and you need some water, essentially. But Jason made me a model canoe right here.
I'll do the demo. You do the talking.
Good. So, but essentially what you do, Jason, is you support the canoe.
This is a canoe.
Yeah, you have to support it under the ends. And,
the middle is unsupported.
Prop it up here so it doesn't tip over and hurt somebody. Put some water, just the right amount inside there. Maybe 5-6 inches of water, depending on how big your canoe is. Heat up a bunch of stones in a fire. Just get them as hot as you can get, glowing hot. Put them down into the water, and you can see it'll start boiling pretty violently, generating a lot of steam. And then cover the whole thing up. And in the old days, folks would have been covering it up to contain the heat with woven cedar bark mats. Everyone had those. And, nowadays we have the magic of plastic or, some tarp from the hardware store. But cover it up to contain the heat. And, as you put those stones in there, you can hear them just boiling the water violently. As they cool off, replace them. Jason, you got to put some fresh ones in. And
stones out, stones in.
So if you've carved it correctly to start with, what will happen is once the wood becomes thoroughly heated all the way through the thickness of it, it'll become pliable. And when it does that, just from the weight of everything pushing down here in the midsection will cause the ends to come up relative and the sides to widen out.
So if the ends go up and the middle goes down, the sides have to come out. Magic, exactly.
It's like a really slow magic trick. So like you start early in the morning. That's the way it is for me. I've got a big black piece of plastic we put over the top of it. And so you start out early in the morning with this fire business, and then, by afternoon, you can pull the plastic off and this magic thing is happening. At that point, just put in some temporary spreaders to hold it that way until you can finish, putting your seats and other bracing in there.
Stormy says, yeah, you just do this. When he told me that very first day I met him in the shed, I nearly fell over because I had just never heard of anybody steaming an entire boat before because I'm not from Alaska. But yeah, so this is critical to our story. Let's see, we've done that. We've got a little bit of a fun video here, if this works. This is a model we made of an unsteamed canoe in Stormy's carving shed. You can see that this canoe is log-shaped. This is an 18-foot canoe. If we draw sections through it, we see the shape of it really well. This is starting to get into how we make lines drawings, right? Each one of those sections has a different shape. We can draw those sections, get rid of the canoe, and we can see those shapes. And we'll get rid of those So here you can see that midsection here. We'll call that the midsection. And you can see how log-shaped that is. So that's the unsteamed version of an 18-foot Haida canoe. Hopefully that canoe gets steamed this summer. Here's an 18-foot canoe that has been steamed. And you can see without even drawing the sections how elegant that is in comparison to the unsteamed canoe. The graceful shear line, the open midsection. The radical transformation of that. I mean, that is a graceful midsection, right? For those folks like me who geek out on boat drawings, this looks a lot like I hate to get in anybody's region, but kind of your Whitehall or your Peapod midsection, right? So there's the unsteamed canoe and the steamed canoe. If you overlay those two midsections, look at that. This is kind of neat to see at this scale. That's larger than real life. This is about 1.5 feet, and this is over 3 feet. So just just dramatic. And this is looking at a single section, but the whole boat moves, the whole canoe moves. So this steaming is critical to our story. Hold on to that kind of concept because it's kind of part of the work we're doing is an investigation of that process. I am going to back up real quick here. And Stormy, if you're up for talking about some of the post-contact harder history stuff.
We didn't do the math.
We're going to do that right now.
Okay.
That's now. We have okay, go ahead.
Well, math's at this amazing place, you know, that it doesn't look like this anymore, and that's kind of a part of the story. We won't get into it too far, but this is where my mother's mother was born, you know, down here above this beach. Like I say, it didn't look like this anymore. So, you know, we've talked about the Ice Age and, you know, people living in this environment and developing canoes and, you know, this whole culture developed in this area, right? And it really became incredibly established. It was a real solid culture. Been there a long time, uninterrupted. And, you know, then people started coming in from, are you doing the math while I'm talking, Jason?
I've got the math.
You got the math. Okay,
Yeah.
then you'll have to do that when we get there. So, you know, all these people came in and ultimately the culture changed, right? And it changed pretty rapidly. And there's a number of reasons why. One of them was disease. And so the reason we were trying to do math is because we didn't know how many people were going to be in this room before we got here. But
we want three.
We want three.
Yeah.
So and maybe if we could, let's see, I'll pick out one volunteer. We'll go back and forth. You can pick out the next one. So if we could get you to raise your hand back there in the corner, okay, and just hold your hand up.
And Pete, just because I know Pete's name, Pete, hand up, and we can get one more volunteer. Awesome. Okay. We've got three. If you look around the room, we have 3 hands up here.
Okay, so we're just going to kind of pretend for a minute that, you know, you are a village. Everyone in this room is a village. And then we had a whole bunch of disease come through, and everybody died except for the 3 with their hands up. Like, this is essentially what happened. And well, you probably don't want, yes, another hand came up back here.
Sorry.
That's a good idea.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
That actually is an excellent segue into the concept that there is no choosing who gets kept. And whoever is left has the burden or responsibility of carrying forward the culture.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. So, I mean, I feel like, well, all of, you know, everyone in this room, I suspect, feels some burden of responsibility for, you know, carrying forward the work that you do. This is why you're doing it, right? And you know, the folks, the survivors, they may or may not have understood that at the time, right? It was a really traumatic time, etc. But, you know, there are those of us who exist now and that have, you know, been fortunate enough to exist because there were those 3 survivors, and, you know, in the villages, they estimate there was about 95% of the people passed away, right? So there wasn't too many folks left. And, you know, there were other reasons too, you know, governments and, I'll just leave it at government.
Stormy's very gracious about it, but
I don't like to dwell on this too much. Yeah.
Very deliberate efforts to erase the culture. We'll leave it at that because Stormy doesn't go there much, but it was a dramatic, intentional attack on the culture as well as this disease.
So a lot of things were lost. I don't know if are we talking about this here? No.
I guess Stormy, you know, is an impressive person in a lot of ways to me. But one is that through all that, people did hold on to the culture. Through the 1900s, people held on to the culture. And today, in Stormy's tiny village of 80 people in Kasaan, they are growing the traditional culture. And this, again, is like I like to think of future generations of canoe carvers right here.
So I don't know if this is a place, Jason, MC, but what we've kind of discovered over time is that, well, one thing we learned is that, when folks go, a whole culture goes through this traumatic exercise, right, that the outcome can be a little shaky. And you can have waves of that, or one big wave that lasts a long, long time, right? And now what we clearly understand is that the people that are left, and possibly even the people that come into our area, all seem to be a little more healthy when we're doing things, that happened in the historical culture of the area. It kind of makes sense, right? It was like stuff that grew up in that area continues to survive in the area in a cultural way, kind of regardless really of ancestry. I mean, a lot of us connected to ancestry because we have ancestry. I personally don't think it's necessarily that. I think it's more, kind of people in a place type thing that works in the culture. But okay, I'm getting off track, Jason.
No, you're good. Basically, segues right into Stormy forming Haida Canoe Revitalization Group. He's got the awesome logo on his shirt there. I'm going to have Stormy talk about the Haida Canoe Revitalization Group. I'm going to ask Stormy to talk about the Haida Canoe Revitalization Group. I like almost all my slides. I love them, and I say I love this one. Stormy's family, 4 generations here on the left. Stormy's grandmother on the right, Stormy in the middle. Do you want to talk at all about your grandmother's work with the language or any of that, or should we head right into Haida Canoe Revitalization Group?
Well, my grandmother she passed away during the pandemic, but she was really an amazing person. She was a first speaker of the Haida language. So the Haida language, it's not gone, but it's really in danger, and it happened really quickly. When I was a kid, like I mentioned, growing up on the float house, my great-grandmother lived with us for a time, and she never learned to speak English fluently. She spoke Haida and some broken English. Anyway, that's the reason that my grandmother spoke Haida as a first language, because her mother only knew Haida. And then by the time my mother came along, nobody was learning the Haida language anymore. It was frowned upon or forcibly prohibited. So, my mother didn't get that, other than unless she just, overheard her mother and grandmother speaking it in the house when kids weren't supposed to be listening. But, so she did a lot of work on that. It's kind of a long story, but, really amazing. This is a great photograph here, just some family members and, other community members. My 3 granddaughters are in there. Super proud of them. They're the next canoe carvers. And, talking about how the health of the community really kind of hinges on some of these activities. Out of that sprang this really grassroots Haida Canoe Revitalization Group. Go ahead, Jason.
So, it was amazing what we covered in that first time we had a conversation, but Stormy told us kind of about his vision for the revitalization of the canoe craft, and the idea that the revitalization of the canoe craft would strengthen the culture itself, which I think is a beautiful concept. And Stormy has kind of 3 branches of work. First is carving new canoes. Have you carved 4 canoes now?
4. Yep.
4 canoes now. I like to point out to Stormy that he's created a place in the world where there are Haida canoes, and the kids that are growing up there now are in Haida canoes. So carving canoes, voyaging in canoes. This is the end of a trip from Kasaan to Juneau in canoes last summer. And Stormy is a lifelong student of the canoes. There are not a lot of drawings. This is part of our story. There's not many drawings of historic canoes. But if there are drawings of historic canoes, Stormy has them and has studied the shape and the history of the canoes his whole life.
The first time I ever came across one of these drawings, and I think it was this one, it was just like, oh my goodness, we've got to have more of these. You know, I mean, it's just so helpful. It's easier to see the shape of a canoe looking at one of these drawings than it is to actually look at the canoe. You know, it's very helpful. So anyway, meeting Jason, just a miracle. Because that day, you know, where he showed a picture of his family in the tent there with me, and is there another place to talk about this, or I'll just ramble on?
There is. Just go ahead.
You know, so Jason's real quiet the whole time. Apparently he snapped a photograph because that one exists, but he really didn't say much at all this whole time. And I went on, I was just like, blah, 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 blah. And then at the very end, we had left the tent, and his wife says, you need to tell this guy what you do. Because I had rambled on about lines drawings.
About the need for lines drawings.
This canoe up in, the need for lines drawings, this canoe up in Skagway that I recently discovered that was in the museum there. And, you know, his wife, thankfully, says, you know, Jason, tell your story a little bit. And he's like, well, I make lines drawings. I'm a professional. And I was like, I didn't even know you guys existed. It was amazing to me. Anyway, I'm like, it's been life-changing. It really has.
For both of us. Well, that wasn't where we were going to talk about this, but that is a great thing Stormy and I come back to, is that we just happened to walk into this village of 80 people, walk into Stormy's shed, and have this conversation. Little bit more. Stormy is a humble person, but this is one of those longhouses. Stormy restored this longhouse with a team of locals. Everything there is shaped by hand. Everything there is Western red cedar. The city got a, Stormy told me the story, and I'll butcher the story a little bit, but the city got a bid for a construction company to come in and rebuild the house for crazy amounts of money, and would have cut down the forest to get out to the house to do the work. And Stormy and a group of his friends and family restored it by hand. Stormy carves poles. These are restored poles. These aren't some of Stormy's. These are historic poles, really some fascinating ones, in fact. I wish I had a photo of this house from outside, because it's just striking and gorgeous.
These aren't canoes. I won't talk about them too long. These were carved, these two poles were carved in 1880 by a couple of brothers for this house. This one, Chief Sonahat, the owner of the house, he inherited this pole from his uncle. And so nobody really knows how old that one is. It might be 150 or more years old.
Some fascinating poles. More talk about poles at lunchtime. In that very conversation, this is just what Stormy was just saying. In that very conversation, when we first met Stormy, he told me that the two of his challenges are that for the entirety of the 1900s, very few canoes were carved. So there is not an abundance of master carvers around. A handful of canoes were carved. This Alfred Davidson, his family carved a few canoes in the 1900s. So there was a thread of connection from the 1800s to now, but there just are not master carvers in every village that Stormy can learn from. Without those carvers, the historic canoes can teach and can show the shape of the finished canoe. The trick is that those canoes, while they've been preserved, which is fortunate, they're not available to Stormy in Alaska. There are a couple in Alaska. We measured one. We'll get to that. But most of them are further afield: Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C. I like to call this the world's most famous dugout canoe. This is a masterpiece, right? It's carved by the...
I don't know. I've never seen this canoe.
Stormy's never seen this canoe. So in any case...
I know.
63 feet long, 8.5 feet wide, carved from a single Western red cedar tree. It is a masterpiece of this type of Northwest Coast canoe, and it's essentially inaccessible to a carver that wants to learn from it.
Well, it's a long ways from home, for one. Yeah. Very expensive. Takes days to get there.
Takes days to get there, and it hangs in the ceiling. It's a beautiful exhibit. I go there every time I'm in New York. So Stormy and I have created, it basically it's just the two of us, but we've given ourselves this fabulous title, the Haida Canoe Documentation Initiative. The mission is to document as many historic canoes as we can find, to share that documentation with today's canoe carvers, and to work with those carvers to better understand the shape and to make better canoes.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is cram, 10, 15,000 years into our lifetimes, I guess.
Yeah.
Folks in the old days, they learned intergenerationally for thousands and thousands of years. And then all of that was lost. And near as I can tell, sharing information and creating shareable information like the drawings is the best way to speed up the process.
Speaking of cramming into a short amount of time, we're
don't
going to
have
go
much.
for about another 10 minutes here, and then we're going to take a question or two, and then we're going to get on the bus. So the projects themselves, Stormy found a 30-foot canoe. He'd been fascinated by the 30-foot canoe.
Found it in a museum.
Found it
Yeah.
in a museum nearby in Skagway, Alaska. Was so excited about it that he convinced his wife to go there for their anniversary. Their annual anniversary trip to Skagway, Alaska, to study the canoe. Convinced the curator there that they really needed to make drawings of the canoe. The curator got so excited that she brought us up there to do the work. This particular project we did, this is relatively old school now. We're going to hear from Avery after lunch. Extremely old school at this point. The total station, we measured about 800 points. Measured the boat importantly inside and out so that we could make a series of drawings of the canoe. We made 6 pages of drawings of a canoe, which may seem like overkill because a canoe does not have a whole lot of interior structure or anything. But we were extremely excited about this canoe, and especially excited about the idea of being able to make sections of the canoe everywhere in it. Seemed like a valuable thing for carvers. So now we have, this is also a very elegant example of the type. And so we have this example now for Stormy. And this becomes a great resource, except for this issue, right? So we come back to this issue where if Stormy wants to create this canoe, he's got to carve that canoe. And that canoe is not in the American Museum of Natural History or any other museum anywhere else in the world. How do we find the pristine shape of the Haida canoe? And we finally find our way back here to the forest. Woo! It was a long trip, and we got about 5 minutes. This is what we're here to talk about.
And we've only had a couple minutes.
Yeah, this is an example of an unsteamed Haida canoe. There are a handful of these canoes that were left in the forest. No one knows why. Could have been that people were lost during that great time of tumult. Could have been other issues with the canoe or whatever. But in any case, this is still there. We're just going to fly now. We created a project, got a grant from the Maritime Heritage Grant from the National Park Service, administered by the state of Alaska. Right on. University of Alaska got involved. Cultural Heritage Imaging is a really cool organization in San Francisco that's really good at photogrammetry that supported us with a lot of tech. The Traditional Small Craft Association, John Gardner Grant, Sea Alaska Native Corporation, and the Organized Village of Kasaan all helped us out. And we found our way back to the forest. This is our team. I guess I'll take 1 minute to say that it was just really powerful to be in the presence of the canoe and to consider the master carvers who were in that lineage of carvers being there carving this canoe. Stop me if you need to, Stormy. An introduction to kind of what we find on site. Those three on the right-hand side are models that we made. We made models of the canoe itself, what's referred to as the butt cut, or the bottom that's cut off, and the stump. We made models of all three of those because we didn't know what we would do with those models, but we made models with all three. Stormy's daughter Stephanie has studied photogrammetry. I have as well. So we used photogrammetry on this canoe to make the model. This is a time lapse of us taking hundreds of photos around the canoe. And basically how photogrammetry works, I know some of you are extremely familiar with it, some of you may not be as familiar with it, but we essentially cocoon the canoe in photos, and then the photogrammetry program uses those photos to triangulate and find points on the canoe, finds the same point in multiple photos. And then in this case, it's interesting because I was very excited when we measured, what did I say? On the other canoe, we measured, I think, 800 points. And in this canoe, I think it was 800,000 points were found by the program to make this model. We'll come back to the model. We had an archaeologist from Southeast Alaska, University of Alaska Southeast, who flew a drone over the site to make a really detailed topo map of the site. I wish we had a version of that here, but we don't. While all that was going on, Dan Monteith, another archaeologist, this is Stormy up on top of the stump. And I should let Stormy tell this, but he'll tell it more slowly than I will. But they surveyed the site and found an additional 8 stumps. And so before we even get into measuring the canoe, archaeologist Dan Monteith had said he never has seen another Haida canoe site with multiple stumps. And he started referring to this as the Haida boatyard. So a powerful site, an important site. And Stormy and Dan mapped the locations of all those stumps. And the really cool thing about all those stumps is that for every stump they found a butt cut and a treetop and a big hole in the middle where there was not a log or a canoe. And again, Stormy and I got to stand in that space and consider those canoes that went out to the beach to get steamed. I'm going to try to keep up with this. This is the canoe model itself. The canoe and the model are in rough shape. There's a split down the middle. There's a split on one side. Let's see, can I fast forward through that? I don't know. But we are able to learn from this canoe. One of the first things we notice is that there's this pale green section here. And what we believe is that the canoe's midsection through here was carved to a single growth ring. And so that round shape that you saw in the unshaped steamed canoe very much follows that cylindrical shape of the tree. And I'm going to ignore this for a minute and just go to the part that I find fascinating, is that I hadn't thought about the wisdom or the genius of the canoe steaming quite as to this level. But that cylinder is about 3/4 of an inch, like Stormy said. That canoe that Stormy carved that was 30 feet long, I saw 2 guys lift it up. They were way bigger than me, but there were 2 guys, they lifted that canoe. This 3/4 of an inch thick could have up to 40 growth rings of Western red cedar. And none of that is broken for the whole central section of the canoe. So that whole central section is a cylinder and maintains the strength of the grain of that wood. If you were to carve a canoe to the same shape, you'd cut through that grain and weaken the canoe. So this is creating a very elegant boat-shaped canoe from a cylindrical log shape, maintaining the strength of that cylinder in the finished canoe. It's just, it leaves me speechless, nearly. We measured the butt cut, we measured the treetop. We were able to estimate the size of the tree at that midship section. We were able to determine approximately how much of the tree had been removed there. Stormy's not so sure, but I think that probably, I hate to go there, but it could be that what's happened here is that the bark and sapwood were removed. Stormy's going to go back and look at the butt cut to confirm it, but this is a new kind of research on these canoes. No one's ever had the ability to estimate what the tree looked like that a canoe came from. So there's just fascinating things that we can do with these trees that are in the forest. We're learning a lot from this canoe itself. I think I'm just going to jump to what we can learn from other canoes. There are a handful of canoes on Prince of Wales Island and on Haida Gwaii, and they won't be there much longer. And our dream is to measure those canoes, because each one, we've seen some other ones in the forest already, haven't gotten to measure them, But this one is in pretty rough shape. There are some others that are in slightly better shape that'll give us more information. This one, we're learning about the shape of the exterior of the canoe, but there are some that are more finished. I like to come to this slide here. This is a photo of the old village of Kasaan. Stormy lives in the new village of Kasaan. This is the village that was left at that point of contact. This is the village that is closest to that Haida boatyard. And what gives me the chills is that these canoes could have come from that grove. The time is right and the location is right. And I don't want to say it's impossible that our canoes aren't there, but it's very likely that they are. And the thing that's even more powerful than that to me is the idea that Stormy's family lived in this village. And so Stormy's family could have worked in that boatyard. And this canoe is doing exactly what we hope, of connecting Stormy directly to his ancestors through the boat itself. All that, here's another canoe in the forest. Yeah.
We're looking for more canoes in the forest.
We're looking for more forest. All of this work towards Stormy's efforts of revitalizing the canoe and the Haida culture.
Well, and it's just been a miracle coming together with Jason and some other people too, like Dan Monteith there and others on this project. It's really been incredible that way. Jason and I are both going to be here for the whole conference, so if you're interested in talking about any of this more, I'm sure we could blah, blah. We would love to blah, blah, blah.
We can keep going.
Yeah.
We can keep going. We also learned how to make a QR code. You can go to the website. You can also punch in HCRG, which is the easiest website to remember. Stormy and I both have emails down there at the bottom. And we haven't, HCRG, I've gotten to come to one of these before when I was working for San Francisco, but Stormy hasn't before. And we're just really excited to connect with you folks and kind of talk about some of the things that were talked about in the earlier conversation about small organizations figuring out how to make projects go ahead, because those canoes are out there. We want to measure them, and we don't know how to make that happen right now.
Yeah, we know what we're trying to discover as far as our canoe shape, right? We're looking for that missing shape, and we didn't really go into that too much, but as we're in this working on reviving the culture and improving the health of people in their communities in the region and maybe beyond. Finding that initial shape is really critical to the success of a canoe maker, because it takes just a massive amount of work to make one of these canoes. And then when you go through that critical period of steaming the canoe, if you have not carved it right, and you saw my canoe, it's pretty good, but when I compare it to the pictures of what the old timers did, it's like, they would have been like, hey, get out of here, kid. You come back when you're ready to carve a canoe. So there's a lot of work to be done to really just get back to the point of what the old timers are doing. What we really don't know, I think, how to do. I mean, we've made it this far, right? We're working through it, but there may be people in this room, or you may know people who have great ideas or something, or want to get involved with us to continue to move this forward, because there are canoes yet to be discovered in the forest, canoes yet to be made, canoes yet to document, etc. Maybe you even
There's plenty of work to do.
Yeah, there may be other canoes around the world that are in collections or something that we don't know about, and we would love to hear about those as well. So anything that has to do with canoes from the Northwest Coast, or really any canoes, we're pretty interested. But really appreciate all of you being here, and I'm just so glad to be here with Jason. It's awesome.
We got time for one question, John?
Yeah. Thank you. It was really interesting and fascinating. Having with Wisconsin Maritime Museum, we have a few canoes in Wisconsin I've heard about in Lake Mendota and Madison. It's a cache of them. Like, the question is, over 10 of them, some going back 4,500 years. Forest canoes being cached there, at least in the process of being made. Are there any discoveries of them underwater? How were they used against the slide duration? Were they handed down? And so anything underwater.
We don't know of any that have been discovered underwater. You may have heard about, I guess we didn't have the fish trap in here. There are things discovered underwater that are from what, 12, 13, 14,000 years ago, fish traps and things like that, but I don't know of any canoes that have been discovered underwater. In the saltwater, everything goes away so quickly in our area. You know, there are just so many things that will eat the wood, and away it goes. And you know, people did use canoes on lakes and things, so it is possible that there could be some somewhere, but not yet. You know, well, we haven't really put it to the test yet, but Bill Holm, kind of an amazing guy, you folks might know about him. He worked at the Burke Museum for a long time. He made a dugout canoe and used it for 40 years, you know, in recent times, and the only reason its life ended is because a tree fell on it during a windstorm and smashed it. But, so yeah, presumably a lifetime if you took good care of it.
This is great. Stormy, thank you for coming.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Tom.
for doing this. I'm glad you stayed.
We'll be here.
We have a lot of networking opportunity. That's a big part of the program, actually.